just the soft hackle sinks barely under the surface, and it's coming back toward the trout. It looks exactly like a drowned mayfly or an emerging caddis or an emerging mayfly. It is the most underrated fish catching technique in America, in my opinion.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haig. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Today our guest is Joe McHugh of Ft Collins, Colorado. Ft Collins is a growing town about 60 miles north of Denver, right there tucked into the Front Range. And Joe has been fishing in Colorado and many parts of the West for over 50 years. He's a longtime guide in some of the most fabled trout streams in northern Colorado, but also all over North America. And let's find out what makes Colorado so special. Joe, good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you've been out fishing this week. How's the fishing been?
You know, it was incredible for the last couple of weeks, but it's starting to get a little bit tougher because we've got some hot days. We had a big snowpack this year, so the water's just starting to come up and get a little bit off color. But it's been fantastic. The olives have started, and the midge hatch was excellent in February. So yeah, it's been great.
Good.
But it's going to get challenging.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, it's going to get to be that muddy time of year here. So good snowpack means good late summer fishing, right?
Yeah, the good snowpack means everything's great because the fishing, lasts longer. It's more consistent throughout the summer. The heat doesn't have such an effect on the fish, doesn't pound them as hard. So we love it when it's above the 100%.
There we go. Love that. So let me ask you about Colorado, right? So Colorado, definitely one of the premier destinations for fly fishing in the U.S. What is it about Colorado that makes it so special? And why do you like northern Colorado in particular?
Wow. Colorado, to me, has such a great diversity of landscapes. And so just from a visual standpoint, fishing the frying pans in a tight little red, kind of a basalt and red sandstone canyon and with deciduous trees, but it's surrounded by big, beautiful mountains with spruces and aspens, and then you run into these big open valleys where the South Platte starts in South Park, or the North Platte starts in North Park, or the Colorado runs through what's called Middle Park. So park in Western lingo means a big, wide, huge, sometimes 50, 60, 100-mile basin, sagebrush often. And so there's a lot of variety, small streams, backpacking lakes, huge rivers. There's just tons of different variety, a lot of places to fish.
Yeah, I've read somewhere that Colorado has 9,000 miles of trout streams, so that's enough to keep you busy for a lifetime, I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I fell in love with Colorado when I was 16. I was lucky enough to go on Outward Bound down in the San Juans near Durango. And ever since then, I've just had a love affair with the state. It is an absolutely gorgeous state. But tell me a little bit about your background. So how did you get into guiding and how did you end up in this area?
Wow. Okay. Well, my dad was from down south. He was in the oil business back in the 60s, early 60s, late 50s. We moved to Wyoming from Louisiana when I was 2. I have pictures of me fishing in Wyoming when I'm 2, standing on a rock in the Wind Rivers. I don't remember if I got anything with a Zebco, plastic rod and reel, but
hey, send that picture to me. I'll put that up on our website. That sounds awesome.
I should. It's hilarious. But anyway, I grew up in kind of where Denver, the west part of town back in the 60s was where Golden and Arvada, some of these little kind of non-entity suburbs, a horse kind of property. It was really very rural back then. And my dad was more of I hate to say this, redneck fisherman. I don't know if that's legal to say, but bobbers and bluegill and bass and speckled trout in Louisiana and that kind of thing. But I had a neighbor who was several neighbors actually that were Colorado natives, and these folks were hauling me out to the Williams Fork or the Blue River or the Miracle Mile up in Wyoming,
Yeah.
Colorado River, from the time I was, 6 or 7 or 8 on. And then, and then when I was old enough to drive in high school, we would drive up to the South Platte. Really wasn't very far, the Deckers area and Foxton and 11 Mile, and that whole area was 30 minutes away. Waterton Canyon, the Blue River up by Dillon was only an hour away from where I grew up. So started doing those kind of trips, and I loved the outdoors so much that by the time I went to college, I did my undergrad at what was then called Western State College of Colorado. Now I think it's called Western Colorado University, which is in Gunnison, tiny little town. That just kind of expanded me over the Western Slope. And as far as getting to Northern Colorado, it had more to do with two things. One, I had a very serious romance, and my girlfriend at the time, who I've now been married to for about 34 years, was going to CSU to study pre-vet.
Congratulations.
Yeah, she was at Colorado State here in Fort Collins, and I did student teaching down in Denver and got hired to teach public school art in Fort Collins. So that put me here. And of course, I started actually fishing the Cache la Poudre River in about 83, I would say, when we were dating in 84, 85. And then, so I've been fishing it 37 years, something like that, the local river. And it's an excellent river. It doesn't have a dam on it. It's not a tailwater. It's not famous for monster trout. And that's great because it doesn't get the, people pounded into a 1 mile stretch of a tailwater like some famous rivers in Colorado, like the Taylor or the Frying Pan. And it's 60 miles long, the canyon, I believe, from the top all the way through to town. And there's fishing all the way up, all kinds of different fishing. And so there's a lot of great variety. And then it also accesses, if you go over the top of Cameron Pass, you can get into North Park and Walden, and there's lots of lakes and rivers, the Yampa over by Steamboat. I mean, this is a really good place to be, to also access the North Platte in Wyoming. And then even, I can be up fishing in Montana and be on the Bighorn in 6 hours from my front door if I wanted to.
Sounds
lots of access to cool places.
Yeah, sounds like a mecca. I was going to let the listeners in on a little secret of sorts. So the music on our show is from this band called the Brothers Fountain, and these guys, right? How did you meet those folks?
It's a crazy story. I volunteered at a place called the Matthews House. It's a transition center for foster care teenagers. And
good for you.
One day, J.J. Fountain was actually volunteering there and beating everybody at foosball, which he's like 28 years old, and I'm 30 years older than he is, or more than that. And he actually called me, and I mean, we only had one conversation, but he asked me if I wanted to join him in this backpacking wilderness ministry in the church that he was in. And this wilderness thing, my life has done this for ever and ever and ever. And JJ and AJ, his brother, Justin and AJ, were guides for this program, and they knew that I backpacked somehow. And so we actually met those guys and really got to know them out. The first time we really got to know them was a long trail training, week-long backpack. And so we've been friends for the last couple of years. We ended up doing a trip with JJ, guiding a group of teenagers into the Rewa Wilderness area for a week. So
nice.
We got to know each other pretty well.
You're a brave man at your age, right? To be guiding those teenagers. But it sounds like AJ and Justin could spot a good volunteer from a mile away. So good for you. All right. So tell me a little bit about a little more about Northern Colorado. So I know you really like the Poudre River. We can talk about that. I believe it means hide the powder, right? There's some story there about some French trappers, right? Right.
Cache la Poudre means hide the powder, and French trappers in this area, they named this river, the Overland Trail went right through this area. So there's a lot of history here, a lot of access to like Fort Laramie and all those territories that the military was up into in the 1870s, 60s, and 70s, up in the Bozeman Trail. All that stuff is close to here. So So, yeah, the Poudre starts at about, I'd say, the headwaters come from Rocky Mountain National Park on one branch, and then there's another branch that comes down a creek, and probably close to 11,000 feet. There's a pass, and so it's pretty small, very fast freestone river, lots of huge boulders and lots of waterfalls and pocket water, and very kind of tumbling for the first 20 miles maybe. And then it kind of hits a big bunch of meadows. And the meadows are high aspen meadows with a lot of cattle grazing, elk herds, bighorn sheep, mule deer, mountain lions, black bear, and so forth. And then after it wanders through a series of meadows for probably 10 miles, it starts hitting more kind of big canyon water, and then hits a really intense section of canyon called the Narrows. And so from the Narrows down, it becomes very popular kayaking and river rafting water. They run a lot of trips of rafting up the river, and of course in the summertime when the water's high, and lots of rapids and winding and a really deep, steep canyon all the way until it kind of spits itself out into the plains, where it's a big looping western plains river through cottonwood groves, like you would picture, rivers up in Montana. And then it runs through town, through Fort Collins, and then pops out the other side and goes on runs into the South Platte at Greeley. So Greeley's a town about 40 miles east of here. So that's kind of the whole extent. There sometimes is decent trout fishing, even out in the plains. It just depends on the depth of the water and the temperature and so forth. In town, fishing through Fort Collins can be amazing at times.
Oh, really?
So there's fishing all the way from town all the way to the top. Yep. And I don't know if you want me to keep talking about this, but the trout profile changes.
Yeah, please.
A bit. Up at the top of the canyon, you'll run into more cutthroat. I think they probably get out of there's a Joe Wright reservoir up there that it's not on the Poudre, but there's a creek that comes out of it that feeds the river. Always there's brown trout throughout the whole length. The cut bows are in there, quite a few. I don't know if they've stocked those. And then there's rainbow throughout the whole river. When you get into town, and below the Narrows, where there's more campgrounds and more access, I do believe they stock it down on that bottom part pretty frequently, because it's more of a mindset of families and kids and fishing and kind of the Rocky Mountain experience. But if you get above the Narrows, there's a long sections of gold medal, blue ribbon kind of water, designated catch, fly and lure only. There's a different limits on those sections that are smaller, that it's very much fly fishing water up at the top, and no bait or any of that kind of thing.
That's great. Yeah, I've heard this river is known for year-round dry fly fishing, or at least maybe summer dry fly fishing, but and tons of public water. So with Colorado, the landowners own the stream bed as well. You've really got to sort of be aware of where you are in terms of public versus private, right?
Right. If you go up to Montana, you can float, or you can get out of your boat. You can wade even through the stream bed is public. But in Colorado, the landowners do, like you just mentioned, Steve. The landowners own the stream bed, so you can't wade wherever you want. I mean, there's big sections of like the Frying Pan River, where in the middle of the river there's wooden stakes that say no trespassing, and they mean it. You can't wade up some of that water up there. Yeah.
We'll talk about walk us through, some of the major hatches there, and, what you're doing at different times of the year. I mean, you mainly out there nymph fishing until you see something coming off, or, can you rig up in the morning with some?
Those are good questions. Oddly enough, the dry fly fishing, we have plenty of days. I have a son that lives in Montana, and this is an advantage that I actually get here, but we have plenty of days in January. I'll just start with the beginning of the year, where it can get up to 50 or 60 degrees. And if it's a little tailwater or any kind of open water, midges will hatch, if it's a sunny day, even if the banks are deep snow, and edge ice year round. So I've caught fish on dry flies every month of the year in Colorado, and I try to fish dry flies year round. So I hate to defer to, putting on a nymph, but you can put on a nymph in January, February, March and fish, especially little midge nymphs, little zebra midges and
Sure.
even little brassies and tiny thread-bodied midges and things like that. I particularly love to swing really small soft hackle midges downstream to rising trout that time of year because they're spooky, the water's low, and it's a tactic on a 6X tippet that doesn't seem to disturb them as much. So it can be really a killer technique.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much a midge ball game around here. I won't speak about the rest of Colorado, but it's a midge ball game January, February, March, and then as things warm up before runoff, this is the early season before runoff. So let's say springtime from March through middle of May is great because you get the midge thing happening. And then toward the middle or end of March, depending on how warm the days are, we get great Baetis blue-winged olive hatches on the Poudre, on the Thompson. The Thompson is the next river to the south that runs through Loveland and Rocky Mountain National Park. Also, I saw some March Browns buzzing around pretty dang big the other day, like 14, 16s, and 14s. But the fish don't seem to key to them a whole lot. Even some caddis start around mid-April in the lower canyon. So all of the hatches start in the bottom of the canyon because it's warmer. And as you go higher up, the water's colder and the hatches haven't really gotten going. So then I would say what gets kind of this touchy time period is like now, the end of April and May. You feel great because some caddis are coming off, blue-winged olives are happening, fish are starting to look up, catching a lot of fish on wets and dries on top. Nymphing can still be really effective, or even a dry dropper like a blue-winged olive on top or a parachute olive and dropping down, a couple feet and putting on a tiny little, either a midge or like a tiny copper john or even a little tiny stonefly imitation. We have winter stones, which are really small, size 18 and 20 black stoneflies this time of year. That can be effective. And then we get into this interesting thing where when it heats up and the snowpack starts coming down, then the water gets off color, but the hatches still can be going on, and even golden stones. And up the Poudre, we have the big salmon flies. Okay. So I've run into them up there, and the fish, like everywhere else I've run into salmon fly hatches, really don't want to key to them on the top. But, there's monster salmon fly nymphs that you can bounce along the bottom, even some big dark streamers. Big conehead streamers when the water's high is effective because the edges tend to be a little bit clear. It's just impossible to wade. Like the Poudre will go from, right now it's running about 200 CFS, and when runoff is in full swing, it'll get 3,000, 3,500. And I saw it flood at 9 or 10,000 in 2013. So you have to be very careful. It's tough. It's pretty much fishing the edges with streamers or big dark nymphs, things that they can see. Okay. There's not a lot of stuff happening on top. And then runoff peters out, usually depending on the weather and the snowpack, by the end of June, beginning of July. 4th of July is pretty much a guarantee for the dry fly fishing, and then it just explodes. Caddis are thick in the evenings. And then we get into, in July, there's green drakes up the Poudre. Okay. Yeah. A great green drake hatch that sometimes will run from late July all the way to September, depending on where you are on the river. Great PMD hatches, all different kinds and colors from size 18 up to 14s, cream ones, kind of pale creamy green ones, and some that are more melon quill looking. The Baetis and the olives will be going all year.
What size are those?
Oh, geez. The olives will be, in the late fall, which we'll get to. The Baetis will get down to 22s and 24s, but in the summer, 18s and 20s are pretty much standard procedure. A quill-bodied olive parachute is deadly on the rivers in the west during Baetis hatches. So nice. Then we get into this season, which So I'd say the height of the summer fishing, really the end of June all the way through the beginning of September. And then things change pretty rapidly. The water drops back down, but it's crystal clear by then. The fish have been hit pretty hard all summer. They're pickier. The caddis slows down. The stoneflies are pretty much gone. The PMDs are gone. The green drakes are gone. And so you're back to Baetis and, little tiny blue-winged olives and then the midges. And that's a very fun and beautiful time to fish, but extremely challenging with long leaders, long tippets.
Okay.
Fish are spooky. The water is just crystal clear. The aspen are changing. The air is crisp. The trees are gold. It's gorgeous. It's awesome.
Yeah, it sounds really amazing.
It is. And then the snow kicks in and, October, November, and fishing opportunities get more spread out. The fish will, they'll eat all the way till, November, but then all of a sudden, the upper Poudre will start to lock up. You will get, it'll ice over all the way down the canyon. It'll pretty much ice over because there isn't a dam. It's not a tailwater.
You got to be pretty hardcore to get out there when it's iced up, including your rod guides, right?
Yeah, and I used to do that a bit. There'd be a channel maybe between two big, huge slabs of edge ice. And really by that time, I feel like the fish need a break. The brown trout are spawning. And it's miserable. My hands are freezing. And it's not quite as enjoyable. Plus, there's tailwaters if you're really desperate. You could drive over to the Frying Pan River near Aspen, and that thing runs with hatches year round, or the Taylor, or you can hike into the South Platte up Cheeseman Canyon or 11 Mile or some of those places, but those places get very cold and a lot of shade in the wintertime too. So that's kind of the year in a big nutshell.
That's great. That was a really good overview. I want to take you back to what you said about soft hackles. So not many people really think of a soft hackle these days. It's sort of a old-fashioned fly in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great that you're using these. Can you talk about soft hackles? What kind of patterns are you using? What sizes are those? And say a little bit more about how you fish them.
That's a really amazing thing that has baffled me, that some people look at it, it's like people think, okay, I either need a strike indicator and a nymphing, or if I'm lucky, I'm going to fish on top or dry drop or all these other rigs or Euro nymphing, or swinging a streamer or stripping a streamer.
Yeah.
But I started dinking with, I'm a real fly fishing history freak, and I've got a huge library of books that were originally written, anywhere from the 1600s all the way through the 1800s. And
nice.
There's also some American fly or soft hackle guys like Sylvester Neames and a lot of people who practiced it. So I started reading about this stuff, and there wasn't a lot of info. This is 30 years ago, and I started dinking with it, but it kind of drove me nuts because I couldn't really detect the strike. I didn't know what I was doing at first. I didn't know whether I should swing them or dead drift or whatever.
Right.
But probably 15 years ago, I made a decision. I fished all the way up a big section of river. There was a great dry fly hatch, and when it slowed down, I thought, I'm going to discipline myself. I had tied up a bunch of soft hackles, and I'm going to discipline myself to fish these suckers all the way back down. And I hammered the fish. And so a lot of the caddis around here have a very bright, kind of a deep Kelly green body. So I've been tying, a famous one is like the grouse and green. I use Alec Jackson hooks that are made for North Country or soft hackle flies. But you could use regular TMCO, some of the nymph hooks say soft hackle too, or wet fly hooks. But I prefer the Alec Jackson soft hackle hooks because they're thinner and they don't sink. And so many times when there's a hatch, you think the fish are popping the surface, but they are not. They're rolling for the emergers, and a soft hackle sits in the top inch or half inch or, sometimes 2 inches of the surface. And if you think about, fish rising and rolling for caddis emergers, a soft hackle with that soft, moving, squishy looking, game hackle, like I use pheasant, I use quail, I use chukar partridge. A lot of these birds I shoot when I'm hunting in the off season. Okay. And traditional silk bodies like pure sol silk in green, orange, red, yellow, and sizes comparable to say TMCO sizes would be from say 22s up to like 10s or 8s.
Oh, really?
Even. But I'd say the most common size, yeah, you tie them sparse though. So if you're tying on what would be comparable to say a 10, the fly really looks like it's more like a 12 or 14. But if you swing these soft hackles in a blue-winged olive hatch, and you have them tied to the exact size and the right color, and you're using a dun-colored soft hackle like a starling hackle or even a valley quail from California, it's kind of a gray. They're deadly. They're unbelievable. And even some waters that are fished hard, like the upper Taylor. If you go to the upper Taylor, everybody's dredging with a real long leader and fine tippet for these big fish with strike indicators. And I've gone up there when there's a hatch, and the fish rise up there a lot, but they're very picky. And you get above them with a long leader and 6X tippet and a soft hackle, or you cast upstream the greased line method. So you have 2 inches of ungreased tippet and then your soft hackle, and you grease maybe 6 inches or 10 inches of the tippet above it with like fly floatant, and you cast upstream. And so just the soft hackle sinks barely under the surface, and it's coming back toward the trout. It looks exactly like a drowned mayfly or an emerging caddis or an emerging mayfly. It is the most underrated fish catching technique in America, in my opinion.
So Joe, you're saying grease up to 9 or 10 inches so that that keeps the soft hackle from dropping too far down into the water.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Okay. It's an old salmon fishing technique. So exactly, it keeps the thicker part of the tippet and leader floating, but it allows the soft hackle to drop just a little bit. And so many people default automatically to nymphing, but I will personally fish wets. I put clients on wets in hatches, and they don't have to cast perfectly because it's a down and across kind of thing. You let the first 10 or 20 feet go dead drift over a rising fish is really effective. But if it swings down, as it swings, it comes up higher in the water toward the surface. It looks exactly like a rising bug. And then, and as it gets to the surface, you even let it hang there on the hang down for a few seconds. And then there's a thing called the Lyson ring lift, where you don't just pull your cast off the water like you're dry fly fishing.
Yeah.
But if you slowly lift, it gives it that last inch or two of rise. And I've caught a lot of fish just taking it on that last lift.
Oh, that's a great tip.
It's a blast.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Hey, Joe is going to send us a picture of his wet fly box, and I'll put that up on our Facebook page for the Destination Angler. So soft hackles can imitate a caddis or a mayfly, you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Or stoneflies too. Stoneflies hatch under those rocks and have to crawl and swim to the bank and pop out of their shuck. And some soft hackles, in fact, most, if not all soft hackles, not all, but most of them are kind of generalists. So they're not going to immediately, they're not really quite match the hatch, but if there's a caddis hatch, I'm going to match the size and color with the soft hackle. And especially with the blue-winged olives. And this may sound crazy, but during a midge hatch, I tie some really microscopic soft hackles that I mentioned this earlier, with just a thread body on a tiny hook and one twist of starling.
Yeah. And
drifting those over picky fish in low water with a long tippet is just wild, because if you don't have to cast your tippet and line over them and spook them.
Yeah.
And often, they're not going to take, or they're spooked by strike indicators or bouncing a midge nymph along the bottom. So I saw my wife catch a 26-inch rainbow on a soft tackle accidentally standing in a pool on the frying pan a few years ago.
Yeah, right.
She was talking to me and letting the line run out downstream, and all of a sudden her pole, her rod, and it was a new bamboo rod I bought. Well, it was an ancient bamboo rod, but it was new for her, and it just started being. I said, I think you have something. She kind of lifted, and here's this monster rainbow. So,
oh my gosh,
yeah, it's fun.
I'd like to have more accidents like that.
It's women,
that's pretty good.
Luck. Yeah.
Hey, I've been, brown trout fishing at night and standing there talking to my buddy, and all, just with a willy bugger 30 feet hanging off the back of my rod. All of a sudden, bam, fish on.
Right.
I didn't do a thing. So, it happens to us all, if we fish enough.
And that's when you don't tell your buddy what happened. You act like it's all your fault, but you did it with pure skill.
Yeah, look what I did. Yeah.
Right.
So Joe, you fish out of St. Peter's there in Fort Collins, right?
Right. St. Pete's is the local fly shop, and
Okay.
the guys in there are really great guys. They have two shops in Fort Collins. One's on the south side and one's in Old Town. And they've been guiding. They've had the shop in town, I would say, at least probably 15 years, and they have some really great experienced guides.
Oh, that's fantastic. I know you're telling me about a guide meeting recently where everybody was sort of lamenting the fact that, hey, we're in the middle of the coronavirus right now. It's the end of April when we're recording this, and I'm curious, how has the coronavirus affected your business and everybody at St. Pete's?
Yeah. Well, of course, the governor did a complete shutdown, and fly fish guiding is not considered an essential business.
Darn it.
Fortunately, these guys have been, doing some online stuff and still sending things out, but that's it. And so there's a pretty big staff of guides at St. Pete's, and all of us can't work until whatever the rules change. And, it's very difficult to maintain a 6-foot distance when you need to explain to somebody, what the fly is or how to tie a knot, or you're looking over their shoulder trying to point out a fish rising,
Right.
or trying to get them to read the water. You're right in their face, or eating lunch with them. So right now, as far as what I've heard, last time I talked to the guys over there that run the shop, is they're hoping to get something going, but we don't know what that looks like and how we're going to implement it at this point.
Okay.
It's put the entire industry in a bind. And some of these folks, some of the guides, I think I haven't talked to them personally, but I think some of them have moved on because they counted for their entire income to be from February, March, April, the beginning of the guiding season, all the way through October. And with this being a big unknown, not many people can sit around waiting for something to happen. They need to jump onto something else. So it's had a major effect on the entire fishing industry.
Yeah, it's super concerning. So, I decided to start this podcast. I thought, is there anything that I could do on the show to help guides out? And so I've set up a GoFundMe site trying to raise $10,000 to help the guides that are on the show. And that site is called Help Fishing Guides Survive Coronavirus. I know there's a lot of people who are impacted by this, but if you're one of those people who, is still in a position to give, your support would be, super appreciated. I also hope to split ad revenue with the guides during the coronavirus if I can get some ads going on the show. So anyway, that's what we're doing here on the Destination Angler. Well, let's you're kind of a history buff too, I understand. You talked a little earlier about some of the books you have. You said from the 1600s and the 1800s.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And also, I'd also love to hear just a little bit about, why, what's the purpose behind all this? Why do you fish? Why do you guide? What's the intersection there?
Yeah, it's kind of a really interesting intersection. My primary gig is I was and still am, but I was a public school art teacher in junior highs and high schools for 30 years, and I still teach private art classes. So I'm a painter like you, and
Nice.
also a musician. And it sounds like a strange connection maybe for some people, but fly fishing to me is extremely aesthetic. It's a very beautiful pastime, if you will. And these books that I have, fly fishing has an extremely rich literature. And if you haven't explored some of the famous writers from the past, like I'll just name some, like An Angler's Paradise by Barker, or Rod and Line by Ransom, or Days and Nights of Salmon Fishing by Scrope, or Summer on the Test by Hills, or Where the Bright Water Meets by Harry Plunket Greene, The Complete Angler by Walton and Cotton. Fly Fishing
Yeah.
by Lord Gray. Those are amazing books. I could go on and on and on. Sparse, Gray, Hackle, Fishing Days and Angling Nights. And so I started getting into these ancient tomes because back in the late 80s and early 90s, there wasn't anything in the library here in town but these prehistoric, dusty old fly fishing books that
Is
were,
that right?
re-editions of some of these ancient British books. And so
Yeah.
I started getting into the whole history of fly fishing, and it was really the British who kind of cataloged and kept track of the history of fly fishing. And then they, of course, snootified and codified dry fly fishing on the southern rivers in Hampshire and southern England, like the Test, the Itchen, and the Avon. And so I became fascinated with the flies, the tying, the techniques, and then how it got to the U.S. Theodore Gordon writing letters to Skews. Skews was being the big promoter of nymph fishing, which made everybody mad over there because Halford's dry fly code. And so anyway, the Catskill region of upstate New York kind of inherited the British mindset and kind of modified the flies. And then the Americans were on the ball as far as rods, more than the British with the beautiful Leonard bamboo rods. And so then all the Brits wanted the American rods. And so there's kind of this cross-pollination. But with art, a lot of these old books, they're beautifully written. They're not fast. They're not kind of bro fishing tomes like going out and swinging giant streamers for monster trout in British Columbia or whatever. They're more pastoral, but they're very lifestyle. It's like these fishermen this is their life, to get out of London and hop a train and go into the beautiful meadows of Hampshire. And so being a painter, I paint a lot outside, and I'll bring my watercolor stuff when I fish, and I'll fish for a while. And if I do well, then, when the light's better in the afternoon later, then I'll paint for a couple hours. And so the whole journey of having time to reflect, to think, I've worked out so many issues. It sounds like I have a lot of issues, but I mean, big decisions in life or other, things from fatherhood to job changes to whatever, by standing in a river and looking at the hatches and the mountains and the trees, and sometimes setting my rod down and praying to God for 2 hours rather than fishing. And to me,
great.
The beauty of the sport, Ernest Schwiebert was kind of the big deal writer about fly fishing in the 70s and 80s.
Sure.
And he produced 2 big books called Trout, Volume 1 and 2. They're monstrous tomes. Everybody should read them because they're packed with info. But somebody asked him before he died, back in the mid-'80s, why he fished and what it was all about. And he just boiled it down to beauty, that it's about being in beautiful places, doing something that's beautiful. I think fly fishing has beautiful implements. I'm a bamboo rod nut, and I love old-fashioned patterns of flies. Nice. And I don't know, it's tied in with raising my kids and faith and painting and the whole works.
You've really turned this into a lifestyle, just like the guys
really
in the book.
Is. In fact, my wife and I, this sounds really kind of maybe cheesy or maybe dark, but we were rewriting portions of our will, and we were talking about, hey, what are they going to do with our tired old remains? And there's a section on the river that I love particularly well, and that's where we want our ashes to be stashes,
Yeah.
And we're not the first people that want that. It's been
right.
Many fly fishermen have done that before, and I don't know. It's a lifestyle. It's kind of a touch point for everything else in life, and for us. And
yeah,
I don't know how many people can relate to that, but that's where I'm coming from.
I bet a lot of people could. The lifestyle piece, and just if you're fishing, if you're trout fishing, chances are you're in a beautiful spot. And I think I first heard that, I don't know if you remember a show years ago called Sunday Morning with Charles Kuralt.
Yeah.
And he said something like that if you're trout fishing, you're in a beautiful spot. And that is just so true, because trout need, clear, clean water. And that's usually in a pretty part of the world. I'll tell you something else you mentioned was reflection. And I just think that's a lost art, in our always on world with social media and the phone with us. And, they're like our pets that we just can't put down. Yet where you're on a trout stream, it's just you and nature and your thoughts. And I think you can do a lot of business out there, like you
Definitely.
said, working through things. So that's really cool. So I got a question for you. If there's a hatch on and the fish are rising, do you paint or do you fish?
Now, if there's a hatch on and the fish are rising, I'm fishing.
Yeah, there you go. That's my
man.
Because
the hatch is transient. You don't know how long it's going to last, and I can paint anytime the fish aren't rising.
Yeah.
But you bet, I am fishing every single time. In fact, I was in England fishing the River Test in southern England, and I did real well, booking this big, beautiful piece of water, and we fished it all day, and then I put my rod down, and I did a watercolor of this chunk of river and the river keeper. So there's river keepers there that kind of groom and maintain. And this guy came along after we'd been there for probably 6 or 8 hours, and he thought I was nuts because here was a world famous chunk of dry fly water, and I was doing a painting with my rod sitting on the ground. But
I get that totally. Yeah. You want to capture it. Get it on, do a little plein air painting there.
Exactly.
And you're doing watercolors outside, right? Don't you have to hold the canvas flat when you're watercolor painting?
No. I have a funky little portable chair, a Helinox. Thing doesn't weigh anything. And I can set that up and I have a watercolor block. It looks like a sketchbook, basically. And I have it down where I have all this stuff that fits in a little backpack. And so it's great, man. When you have waders, you can get to some pretty great angles. You get to little islands or some strange places to paint from. And so I pull all that stuff out and paint right, with this watercolor block or pad in my lap. Yep.
That's really cool. So you just pack it right in with you, right along with your fly fishing stuff, huh?
Yep. I throw it in and often I'll put that backpack on. If I'm going to hike in a ways, I'll just bring my watercolor stuff and lunch stuff in a small backpack and my vest and waders and rod and just go on a big expedition. And sometimes I end up painting and sometimes I don't. But it's great if you catch a lot of fish and get a good painting. That's been a heck of a day.
That's a good day. I'm with you.
Yep.
So let's talk just in closing here, just a little bit about how the rivers are doing out there. How's the Poudre doing? How the other one's doing? I know the Poudre is designated a wild and scenic river. I think it's the only one in Colorado like that. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, wild and scenic is a designation it's really a difficult designation to get. And the Poudre has it because there's no dam on the Poudre. And so, but that can be a really good thing. It's a good thing because it's not uglified by having some big impoundment. But the problem is, I don't know, how many people around the rest of this country can relate to this, but the West is getting inundated. The state, this city that I live in has just had a huge influx of people over the last 10 years, 15 years. And the growth curve is immense. And so Colorado and Montana and Wyoming are dry. They're very, very dry places. And so all these people, put a huge strain on the water systems. And ever since I've been a little kid, there's been big arguments and big discussions about damming rivers. Like the South Platte was the one that was on the front burner for a long time. Yeah. There's been talk about damming the Poudre. I think that they want to put a dam off the side of it out of the canyon and somehow manage to kind of keep the wild and scenic thing going. But water rights can be ancient. There's water rights around here that, like Greeley is east of Ft Collins, 40 miles, like I mentioned earlier, but Greeley has had water rights on the Poudre for probably over 100 years, and there's cattle and there's farming out east. Yeah. And so if they want to suck the water out, they legally have the right to, and they have ditches and they have pipelines and they have all this stuff. And so, so it's, you can have the river running 200 CFS in the canyon mouth, 10 miles from where I'm talking to you, sitting in my house. But yet a mile down the road here from my house, it can be 7 or 8. And so unless there's some minimum flows and some legislation that impose minimum flows, then, you're asking for fish kills. These fish can't survive in the winter. The ice fills up all the narrow sections, and they get stuck in pools, and they can be preyed upon easily. In the summer is worse, of course, because the heat cooks them. There's no oxygen in the river if there's too much heat and the water's too shallow, and so that is the problem in the West, and that includes Montana and Wyoming. Trout Unlimited does a lot to try to negotiate and work with people, and it really has to be a partnership between cities and ranching and farming and all the needs, because anymore, the recreation possibilities, Montana was ahead than compared to Colorado on this stuff. But the recreation is more valuable in a lot of ways. But all these people, man, the neighborhoods are building, and everybody's got their little tiny patch of lawn, and they're gardening, and, of course, just washing clothes and the normal human function. So
doing life.
Rivers can be in great shape, especially the higher you go toward the snowpack and up the canyons. But as you get down to the plains, beautiful big rivers like the South Platte become warm, polluted, low, fishless environments within, a few miles of getting out of a canyon. And it's tragic to see that.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, a bit of a reality with, like you said, out in the West, with all the people moving out West. It's sort of like, Montana was discovered years ago, and Colorado. Yeah, it's just, like you said, it's getting crowded. But, there's still lots of public water in Colorado, 9,000 miles of trout streams, and the Poudre's got a lot of public access, which is fantastic.
Steve, that brings up another point, and I don't want to beat this to death, but I think as fly fishermen, we need to be the people that have the ethic of, not all jamming in the same pool and respecting this resource, not only for the trout, like Trout Unlimited and the cold water resource, but just not being foolish with polluting or
right.
Just working together to make this prolonged, because the rivers have changed a lot since I've been fishing in the West, and the amount of people, the pressure, even the way people handle fish is really, really important. The grabbing some big trout and holding them 6 feet off the ground and taking 15 minutes worth of pictures. It's just,
oh man,
it's pretty untenable it's not really not good for the fish, and it looks bad for the fishermen, and it may look cool on your Instagram for a little while, but it doesn't look cool to see.
You kill the fish.
A 20-inch rainbow belly up floating down the frying pan,
Right. So what can anglers do about, the conservation, beyond, handling fish the right way and having some manners on the stream? I mean, should they be writing their congressman?
I think belonging to Trout Unlimited is important. I think knowing some biology, like how foolish it is to wade through a section of spawning reds in the springtime for rainbow and cutthroat, or in the fall for brown trout, recognizing what spawning fish look like, not pounding fish that are stressed when the water's too warm, staying off the water. In fact, I get a kind of a podcast from a guy in England who they're talking about implementing voluntary. Now, this is a really cool concept, catch and release limits. For example, if you go on a river, setting a voluntary limit on how many fish you hook and release, and then going home after you've reached that magic number, because you're not harming as many fish, you're leaving these fish untouched, and you're providing better fishing for whoever's coming after you. So let's say you set a 5 fish or 10 fish limit, and there's a killer hatch, and you could catch 30 or 40 fish that day. You tell your client, hey, we've had enough. It's been beautiful. This is a great day. We've been blessed with this wonderful fishing. We're done. Yeah. What's wrong with that? It's kind of a great idea, in my opinion.
Yeah. Barbless hooks too would be a good start for a lot of people. So,
absolutely.
Well, good. Well, it's great to have you on the show, Joe. We so appreciate you doing this. And thank you, everybody out there, for listening. As I said earlier, you can follow us on Facebook at Destination Angler Podcast. Feel free to email me with your comments and suggestions, and we'll put some things on the show notes on my website, which is destinationanglerpodcast.libsyn.com. And we will see you again next week. Thank you.
Well, I'll go. from the land to the shining sea. But I know, there's more to life than what the eye can see.